My sister slapped my baby at Christmas dinner, said I was overreacting. Everyone just sat there, but then my military commander husband stood up, looked her dead in the eye and said, "Get out." She never came back. The sound still echoes in my mind, a sharp, sickening crack that tore through our Christmas dinner, followed by a scream that wasn't mine, it was my baby's. My sister, my own flesh and blood, had just slapped my 6-month-old son across the face, and in that agonizing moment, everyone at the table froze, completely silent. Hi, I'm Natalie. Last Christmas, my sister Vanessa, a lifestyle blogger, slapped Lucas, my 6-month-old baby, during dinner. The entire family watched. No one moved. No one spoke. They just stared, as if this was completely normal. But my husband, David, a military commander, slowly stood up. And what happened next changed everything. Because it wasn't just about one slap. 3 days later, I discovered it was about 28 years of being invisible in my own family. The Sterling family Christmas dinner had always been Vanessa's show, and this year was no different. She arrived 2 hours late in her white Tesla, dragging in ring lights and a camera crew she'd hired to document her authentic family Christmas experience for her blog. I stood in the kitchen doorway, bouncing a fussy Lucas against my shoulder, watching my mother, Patricia, rearrange our entire dining room to accommodate Vanessa's filming setup. The house smelled of cinnamon and roasted turkey, but underneath it all, the familiar tension of a Sterling family gathering simmered. My father, Robert, sat in his usual corner chair, scrolling through his phone, a master of selective blindness developed over years of managing the drama between his daughters. Vanessa had been posting about this dinner for weeks, hyping it as her family gratitude special, promising followers an intimate look at holiday tradition. What she didn't mention was that David had just returned from a 6-month overseas deployment. Or that we'd driven 3 hours from Cedar Falls just to introduce our son to his grandparents for the holidays. None of that mattered to Vanessa's narrative. David emerged from the guest bedroom, where he'd changed Lucas's diaper. Even off-duty, he carried himself with that quiet authority from years of leading soldiers. He caught my eye across the room, giving me one of those small, comforting smiles that said everything would be okay, even when I wasn't so sure. The dining room had been transformed into a magazine spread. Vanessa had moved Grandma's antique candlesticks, relocated family photos for better angles, and even swapped out our napkins for ones that photographed better under her lights. She directed her cameraman around the table like she was shooting a commercial. Which, honestly, she was. Patricia bustled around her eldest daughter, adjusting everything to meet Vanessa's standards. The turkey, now under heat lamps, had been cooling for perfect serving temperature, but now its appearance for the cameras was paramount. Side dishes were rearranged 3 times. Even the flowers had been replaced. I'd learned long ago not to comment on these productions. Growing up, I'd pointed out the absurdity more than once, only to be met with lectures about supporting family and understanding that some people had bigger dreams. The implication was always clear. I was small-minded, jealous of Vanessa's success, threatened by her ambition. David helped me settle Lucas into the high chair we'd brought, the same one that belonged to David's grandmother, Eleanor. It was solid wood, worn smooth by generations, looking oddly out of place among Vanessa's curated aesthetic. Lucas gurgled happily, reaching for his toys, completely unaware he was about to become an unwitting part of his aunt's content. The meal began with Vanessa's customary gratitude speech, delivered directly to her camera while the rest of us sat in awkward silence. She talked about family traditions, togetherness, and how blessed she felt to share these moments with her followers. 10 minutes, and she didn't mention David's deployment, Lucas's first Christmas, or anything specific about the actual people at the table. When she finally signaled for filming to pause, the atmosphere shifted slightly. Patricia immediately began serving, making sure Vanessa's plate was perfect before addressing anyone else. Robert emerged from his phone long enough to carve the turkey, though he kept glancing nervously at the cameras. David and I exchanged glances as we navigated eating while keeping Lucas entertained and quiet. The conversation flowed in its predictable pattern. Vanessa dominated, updating everyone on brand partnerships, collaborations, and opportunities. Patricia hung on every word, asking about follower counts and engagement rates. I tried to contribute, sharing updates about our life at Fort Henderson, David's promotion, adjusting to parenthood. My stories just vanished into the air, acknowledged with polite nods before the conversation inevitably circled back to Vanessa's world. It was like trying to add ingredients to a recipe that was already completed and plated. David noticed, of course. He always noticed. He made a point of asking me follow-up questions, drawing me back into conversations that had moved on without me. He shared stories about the base community, about how proud he was of me during his deployment. His efforts were kind, but they also highlighted how little interest my own family showed in my actual life. Lucas was remarkably well-behaved for a 6-month-old, content to chew on his teething toys and observe. Occasionally, he'd babble or laugh, drawing brief smiles before the adult conversation resumed. He was fascinated by Vanessa's lights, reaching for them with that determined baby focus. Midway through the main course, Vanessa decided she wanted to film candid family interaction. Her cameraman positioned himself to capture what she called natural holiday moments, though there was nothing natural about performing dinner conversation for thousands. She directed us to eat and talk normally, while she provided commentary about the beautiful chaos of family gatherings. This is when things began to deteriorate. Vanessa had always been particular about control, but the filming pressure combined with her usual need to be the center of attention seemed to escalate her stress. She kept calling for resets when conversations didn't flow right, when an expression wasn't camera-ready, when background noise interfered. Lucas, meanwhile, was getting tired. His cheerful babbling turned into the whimpering any parent recognizes as the prelude to a full meltdown. David and I tried to keep him calm, but the unfamiliar environment, disrupted nap schedule, and unusual activity were clearly overwhelming him. I suggested taking him to the guest room to decompress, but Vanessa immediately objected. She was filming the heart of the segment, people leaving would ruin the content. She assured me babies were adaptable, a little fussing was normal, and we shouldn't interrupt special family time. Patricia agreed, saying I was overly cautious. Robert nodded without looking up. David's jaw tightened, the way it did when he was choosing his words carefully. He gently suggested a short break from filming. But Vanessa was already pivoting to a more authentic approach. Instead of minimizing Lucas's fussing, she'd incorporated into her narrative about the beautiful messiness of real family life. She began speaking to her camera about how holidays with little ones required flexibility and patience. Lucas's whimpering escalated to actual crying. The kind of tired, overwhelmed sobbing that breaks a parent's heart. I reached for him instinctively. Vanessa held up her hand to stop me. She was still filming. Still trying to capture what she now called an authentic moment of holiday chaos. She seemed to think Lucas's distress added authenticity to her content. Proof that her family celebrations were real and unfiltered. David's face had gone completely still, the expression he wore when dealing with difficult command situations. He watched Vanessa with the careful attention he usually reserved for assessing threats. I saw him calculating, weighing options, trying to find a diplomatic solution. I tried again to reach Lucas. Again, Vanessa stopped me. This time, she was more direct, explaining I was being dramatic and a little crying never hurt anyone. She reminded me she'd babysat in high school. Sometimes parents need to relax their overprotective instincts. Lucas's crying intensified. The desperate wailing of a baby who had reached his limit. The sound filled the dining room, competing with Vanessa's continued commentary about embracing the chaos. She seemed oblivious to the fact that everyone else had stopped eating, stopped pretending to enjoy themselves. stopped participating in her performance. Then it happened. Vanessa, clearly frustrated that Lucas's crying was overwhelming her audio and disrupting her segment, leaned across the table. Her hand moved so quickly I wasn't sure what I'd seen. The sharp crack of her palm against Lucas's cheek echoed through the suddenly silent room. Lucas's crying stopped instantly, replaced by a shocked silence that felt like the air being sucked from the room. Then came a wail unlike anything I'd ever heard from him. A sound of pure bewilderment and pain that pierced straight through to my soul. His tiny cheek was already turning red where she'd struck him. Nobody moved. Patricia sat frozen, fork halfway to her mouth. Robert's eyes were wide with shock, but he stayed in his chair. The cameraman kept filming, unsure whether to stop. Vanessa herself seemed momentarily stunned by what she'd done. But David moved. He rose from his chair with the controlled precision of someone trained for high-pressure situations. No rush, no sudden explosion. Just the deliberate unfolding of a man who had made a decision. His 6 feet 3 inches frame seemed to fill the room as he stood, his dress uniform making him appear even more imposing. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but carried an authority that made people listen. "Turn off the camera." It wasn't a request. The cameraman immediately complied. The red recording light disappeared. The room fell into an even deeper silence. David walked around the table to Lucas, still sobbing in his high chair. He lifted our son with the gentle confidence of a father who'd comforted him through countless nights, holding him against his chest, murmuring soft reassurances. Lucas's cries began to subside, almost immediately, reduced to hiccuping sobs as he buried his face against David's shoulder. "Vanessa," David said, his voice still calm, but with an edge that made everyone sit straighter. "You just struck my infant son." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I need you to explain to me why you thought that was acceptable." Vanessa's face had cycled through pale shock to defensive red. "He was being disruptive," she said, her voice higher than usual. "I was trying to teach him that crying isn't appropriate at the dinner table. Sometimes children need clear boundaries." "He's 6 months old," David replied, still in that eerily calm tone. "He doesn't understand boundaries. He understands that someone hurt him." He adjusted Lucas gently, checking his cheek where a faint red mark was still visible. "And you struck him hard enough to leave a mark." The room remained frozen. Patricia finally found her voice. "Vanessa, honey, you shouldn't have." "Don't," David interrupted, not raising his voice, but somehow commanding immediate attention. "Don't minimize this. Don't excuse it. And don't you dare suggest that what just happened was acceptable in any way." He turned back to Vanessa, who was now looking around, searching for support that wasn't coming. "You are going to pack up your equipment and leave now. And you are not going to come near my family again until you can explain to me how you plan to ensure this never happens again." Vanessa's mouth opened and closed. "You can't just. I mean, this is my family, too. You can't ban me from family gatherings." Her voice gained strength, defensive anger replacing shock. "You're being completely unreasonable. It was barely a tap. You're acting like I committed some terrible crime." David's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. Anyone who had served under his command would have recognized the warning signs. Barely a tap that left a mark on my infant son's face," he said. "A tap administered because he was crying, which is literally the only way babies have to communicate distress." He looked around the table, his gaze settling on each family member. "And not one of you moved to stop her. Not one of you said a word. You all sat here and watched someone strike a baby, and you're now trying to minimize it because she's family." The truth of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Patricia's face crumpled with shame. Robert finally looked up from his plate, though he couldn't meet David's eyes. Vanessa's defensive anger wavered, replaced by something that looked almost like recognition. But it was too late. David had made his decision. Natalie, he said, turning to me with an expression that was gentle despite everything. Pack Lucas's things. We're leaving. He paused, looking back at the family that had just revealed its true nature. And we won't be coming back. I stood on shaking legs, my whole body still processing. Lucas was calm now in David's arms, but I saw the confusion in his wide eyes, the way he kept touching his cheek. The sight sent a wave of protective fury through me that I'd never experienced before. As I gathered our things from the guest room, I could hear voices from the dining room, Vanessa's, raised in justification, Patricia's, pleading, David's, still calm but immovable. By the time I returned, David was by the front door with Lucas. His face was set in that expression that meant the discussion was over. Vanessa stood near the dining room doorway, her face blotchy with tears and anger, while Patricia hovered, wringing her hands. This is insane. Vanessa called out as we headed toward the door. You're destroying our family over nothing. Over absolutely nothing. He's fine. Look at him. He's not even crying anymore. David stopped at the threshold and turned back. The fact that you think striking a baby is nothing tells me everything I need to know about your judgment, he said. And the fact that the rest of this family is willing to excuse it tells me everything I need to know about their priorities. He opened the door and gestured for me to go ahead. As we walked to our car, I could hear Patricia calling after us, begging us to come back. But David's stride never faltered. And neither did mine. We drove home in silence. Lucas slept peacefully in his car seat, his cheek now bearing only the faintest pink mark. David's hands gripped the steering wheel, his jaw set. It wasn't until we were safely home, Lucas fed and settled, that the full weight of it hit me. I sat on our couch, still in my Christmas dinner dress, and began to cry. Not just for that evening, but for all the years of feeling invisible, dismissed, and overlooked by people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. David sat beside me and pulled me close without saying anything. He understood that sometimes, there were no adequate words. Sometimes comfort was just being present and steady. I'm proud of you, I finally whispered against his shoulder. For what? For standing up. For protecting him. For not letting them minimize what happened. I pulled back. I don't think anyone has ever defended me like that before. His expression softened in a way reserved just for quiet moments between us. That's what family does. Not real family. They protect each other. They don't excuse abuse. And they don't ask you to tolerate the intolerable for the sake of peace. Later that night, replaying the evening's events, David's words resonated. This hadn't been an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a lifetime of experiences with people who demanded my silence, my accommodation, my willingness to accept less. But this time was different. Someone had stood up. Someone had said no. Someone had made it clear that the behavior was unacceptable, and there would be consequences. As I drifted off to sleep, next to my husband, with our baby safe in the next room, I felt something I hadn't in years when it came to my family, not the fragile peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the solid peace that comes from knowing your boundaries are respected and your worth is recognized. What I didn't know yet was that this was only the beginning. The events of that Christmas dinner would set in motion a series of discoveries that would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and my own strength. But for that night, it was enough to know that someone had finally stood up for what was right. The war began 3 days later with a phone call. David was feeding Lucas his morning bottle, and I was staring at the untouched Christmas presents under our tree. Patricia's voice sounded strained, almost breathless. Natalie, honey, I know you're upset, but we need to talk. Vanessa feels terrible. She didn't sleep at all last night. She wants to apologize properly, but she can't if you won't answer her call. I held the phone away from my ear, looking at David, who watched me with concern. Lucas gurgled happily, unaware of the tension. The red mark on his cheek had faded, but I could still see it. "Mom," I said finally. "She hit my baby. She struck a 6-month-old child because he was crying. I'm not sure what there is to discuss." "She barely touched him, Natalie. You're making this into something much bigger. People make mistakes when they're stressed. You know how important her work is, and having the filming disrupted her work." I interrupted, feeling heat rise in my chest. "Mom." She slapped Lucas across the face because he was interfering with her social media content. "Do you hear how that sounds?" Patricia sighed. "You've always been dramatic about these things, sweetheart. You've blown situations out of proportion. Vanessa was just trying to teach him some boundaries. Sometimes children need firm guidance." The phrase hit me like cold water. "You've always been dramatic." How many times had I heard those words? How many times had my legitimate concerns been dismissed with that exact explanation? I gripped the phone tighter. "He's 6 months old, Mom. He doesn't understand boundaries. He understands that someone hurt him for expressing a basic need." "Now you sound like David," Patricia said. Something in her tone made me pause. "He's always been very rigid. Military men often are. But families work differently than the army. Families require flexibility and forgiveness." David looked up, one eyebrow raised. He'd obviously heard enough. I saw him making mental notes, like intelligence gathering. "What does David have to do with this?" I asked. "Well, he's the one who made the big scene. Vanessa said he was completely unreasonable, ordering people around like he was commanding troops. She said he threatened to ban her from the family." Patricia's voice trailed off, as if David's behavior was beyond words. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Mom. David protected our son from someone who had just hit him. That's what fathers do. That's what anyone should do when they see a child being hurt. But Vanessa is family, honey. Family means giving people second chances. It means not letting one mistake destroy relationships that have been built over decades. David doesn't understand that because he didn't grow up with us. He doesn't know how we handle things." The conversation continued for 10 more minutes, each exchange making me more disoriented. Patricia painted a picture that bore little resemblance to what I'd witnessed. In her version, Vanessa had barely made contact. Everyone had overreacted. David had turned a minor family disagreement into a major crisis through his inflexibility and outsider's perspective. When I hung up, David was watching me with the expression he wore after a difficult mission debrief. "Let me guess," he said. "It's our fault." "According to my mother, yes. Vanessa feels terrible, but I'm being dramatic, and you're controlling because you don't understand how families work." I slumped against the kitchen counter, exhausted. And how do families work, according to her? Apparently, they work by excusing abuse and expecting the victims to be understanding about it. David set down Lucas's empty bottle and lifted him to his shoulder for burping. "She actually said that you don't understand family dynamics because you didn't grow up with them." "She's right about that," David said quietly. "I didn't grow up with them. I grew up in a family where adults protected children instead of making excuses for people who hurt them." The difference hit me with unexpected force. David's family had challenges, but I'd never heard his parents dismiss abuse or ask victims to be understanding of their attacker. His grandmother, Eleanor, had been fiercely protective, never tolerating anyone who tried to harm her grandchildren. The phone rang again an hour later. This time, Robert, my father. His careful tone, rehearsed, probably by Patricia. "Natalie, I think we all need to step back and look at this objectively. Your mother told me about her conversation, and it sounds like there might be some miscommunication. Dad, there's no miscommunication. Vanessa hit Lucas. Multiple people saw it. There's nothing unclear. Well, that's just it. Vanessa said she was just trying to get his attention, maybe redirect his fussing. She said she might have been a little firmer than necessary, but she never intended to hurt him. And honestly, looking at him now, he seems fine. Children are resilient. I stared at the ceiling, trying to process the cognitive dissonance of my own father explaining what had happened to my own child. Dad, intent doesn't matter when we're talking about hitting a baby. The impact matters. The fact that she thought striking him was an appropriate response to crying matters. But that's the thing, sweetheart. She's not experienced with babies. She was just trying to help. Sometimes people make poor choices when they're trying to handle unfamiliar situations. The conversation mirrored Patricia's. Every concern I raised met with an explanation for why it wasn't a problem. Every time I tried to center Lucas's well-being, the discussion redirected to Vanessa's feelings, her inexperience, her stress levels, her good intentions. By the time Robert hung up, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Had I misunderstood? Was I overreacting? My parents, people I'd trusted my entire life, were telling me my perceptions were wrong, my instincts misguided, David's response disproportionate. David found me at the kitchen table, staring at my phone with an expression he later called shell shock. "What did your dad say?" he asked. He said that Vanessa didn't mean to hurt Lucas, that she was just trying to help, that maybe she was a little firmer than necessary, but children are resilient. I repeated the words flatly. David was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Then he asked, "What do you think happened yesterday?" The question surprised me. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because no one else had asked me what I thought. Everyone else had been telling me what to think, explaining what had really happened, correcting my understanding of events I'd witnessed with my own eyes. I think my sister hit my baby because he was crying and it was interfering with her filming. I think it was hard enough to leave a mark and shock him into silence. I think it was completely inappropriate and potentially harmful. I paused, feeling some clarity return. And I think my parents are more interested in protecting Vanessa from consequences than they are in protecting Lucas from being hurt again. That's what I think too, David said. So the question is, do you trust your own perceptions, or do you trust people who are telling you that what you saw didn't really happen? It was a fair question, but a devastating one. The people asking me to doubt myself were my parents. The person supporting my perceptions was my husband, someone I'd known 5 years, but who had consistently demonstrated clearer moral boundaries than my family of origin. The third phone call came that afternoon, and this time, it was Vanessa herself. Her voice was thick with tears, trembling with what sounded like genuine emotion. This was the sister I remembered from childhood, vulnerable and seeking connection. "Nat, I feel so horrible. I haven't been able to eat or sleep. I keep replaying it." For a moment, a flicker of hope. Maybe she'd acknowledge it. "I'm glad you called, Vanessa. Lucas is okay, but I was really shocked. I need to understand why you thought hitting him was appropriate." "That's just it," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I don't think I really hit him. I think I just touched his cheek to get his attention. And maybe because everyone was so tense about the filming, it seemed like more than it was. You know how these things get blown out of proportion." The hope evaporated. She wasn't calling to apologize. She was calling to continue the family narrative that what I'd witnessed hadn't really happened. "Vanessa, there was a sound when your hand made contact. There was a mark on his cheek." He went from crying to completely silent in shock before he started wailing. "That's not a gentle touch. But that's what I'm trying to tell you. I think everyone's perception was distorted by the stress. The cameras, the disrupted filming, David's reaction. It created this atmosphere where a normal interaction got interpreted as something much more serious. I gripped the phone, my knuckles white. Are you saying I imagined the mark on my baby's face? I'm saying that maybe what looked like a mark was just the natural redness from crying. Maybe what sounded like a slap was just the sound of contact that seemed louder because the room was so quiet. Maybe what felt like a big deal in the moment isn't as serious as it seemed. The conversation continued for 20 more minutes. Vanessa had crafted an alternative narrative where her actions were reasonable and everyone else's reactions excessive. She'd convinced herself she was the victim. When I finally ended the call, I felt like I'd been wrestling with smoke. Every time I tried to pin down what had happened, she redirected to interpretations, perceptions, and alternative explanations that made my own memories feel unreliable. David found me in Lucas's nursery, standing over his crib, watching him sleep. He was lying on his back, one tiny fist curled near his face, completely peaceful and trusting. The sight of him, so small and defenseless, crystallized something inside me. She's gaslighting me, I said without turning around. All of them are. They're trying to make me believe that what I saw didn't really happen. Yes, David said quietly. They are. Why? Why would my own family try to make me doubt my own perceptions about something this serious? David joined me at the crib. Because acknowledging what really happened would require them to take action they're not willing to take. It would mean holding Vanessa accountable, which might disrupt their family dynamic. It would mean admitting they failed to protect Lucas, which would force them to examine their own behavior. So instead, they make you the problem. The fourth call came that evening, just as David and I were settling in. This time, Patricia again, but her tone had shifted from pleading to frustrated. Natalie, I'm concerned about how you're handling this. You're being very rigid and unforgiving, which isn't like you. I'm wondering if maybe the stress of new motherhood is affecting your judgment. I felt David tense beside me. The suggestion that my judgment was compromised by postpartum issues was a particularly low blow. Mom, my judgment is fine. My priorities are clear. Protecting my child from people who think it's acceptable to hit him isn't negotiable. But that's exactly what I'm talking about. You're characterizing this as hitting when it was clearly something much less serious. You're creating conflict where none needs to exist. You're making choices that will damage family relationships permanently over something that could be resolved with basic communication and forgiveness. What would resolution look like to you? I asked, curious. Vanessa apologizes for the misunderstanding. You accept that she didn't mean any harm. David acknowledges that his reaction was excessive. And we all move forward with better communication and more patience. I let that sink in. In Patricia's vision, everyone bore equal responsibility. Vanessa would offer a non-apology for a misunderstanding, not accountability. I would accept blame. David would admit overreacting. And Lucas, the actual victim, would be completely absent from the conversation. What about Lucas? I asked. What does resolution look like for him? What do you mean? I mean, what protections would be put in place to ensure this doesn't happen again? What boundaries would be established? What accountability measures would ensure that Vanessa has processed why hitting a baby is never acceptable? Patricia was quiet. Then, irritated, you're overthinking this. He's fine. He's not going to remember any of this. You're creating trauma where none exists. And there it was. The heart of our disagreement. In my family's worldview, trauma only existed if the victim remembered it clearly. A baby couldn't be truly harmed if he wouldn't remember it. Adult comfort and family harmony took precedence over protecting children from experiences they might not remember. After I hung up, David and I sat in silence. The movie paused. This wasn't going to blow over. My family wasn't going to come around. We had to make decisions about how to move forward with people who fundamentally disagreed with our basic values about protecting children. I feel like I'm going crazy, I admitted. 3 different people have told me that what I saw didn't really happen. People I've trusted my entire life are asking me to doubt my own perceptions. That's the point, David said. They need you to doubt yourself, because if you trust what you saw, you'll make choices they don't want you to make. If you believe Lucas was actually hurt, you'll protect him from people who might hurt him again. They can't have that. But why? Why is protecting Vanessa from consequences more important than protecting Lucas from being hurt? David was quiet for a long time. I think your family has spent a long time organizing itself around managing Vanessa's needs and emotions. She's the center of attention, the drama, the person everyone has to accommodate. Protecting that system is more important than protecting individual members who threaten it. The observation hit me with uncomfortable accuracy. Growing up, family decisions had often been made based on how they would affect Vanessa's mood. Family gatherings were scheduled around her. Conversations moderated to avoid upsetting her. Even my achievements had been downplayed if they threatened to overshadow hers. I'd accepted this dynamic as normal. Healthy, even. It had never occurred to me that this support system could become so entrenched that it would prioritize Vanessa's comfort over a baby's safety. The final call of the day came close to midnight. I was in bed, still awake, replaying conversations. When I saw Vanessa's name, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity made me pick up. Natalie, I know it's late, but I couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about how to fix this mess. Her voice was softer, less defensive, more sad. I miss you. I miss being close to you like we were when we were kids. For a moment, a pang of nostalgia. We had been genuinely close once. I missed that too, I said honestly. But I need you to understand why yesterday was so serious. Lucas is my baby, and seeing someone hurt him triggered every protective instinct I have. I get that. I really do. And I would never intentionally hurt him. You have to know that about me. Maybe I was too focused on the filming. Maybe I wasn't thinking clearly, but I would never deliberately harm a child. It felt like progress. An acknowledgement that her judgment had been compromised. Thank you for saying that. I know you wouldn't hurt him on purpose, but impact matters as much as intent. And the impact was that he got hurt. What I need is some assurance that you understand why it happened and how to prevent it from happening again. Of course. I think what I need to do is be more mindful when I'm around children, especially when I'm stressed or working. Maybe I should ask for help instead of trying to handle situations on my own. It wasn't a complete acknowledgement, but it felt like movement. We talked for a few more minutes about boundaries and communication. When we hung up, I felt cautiously optimistic. Maybe this could be worked out. Maybe the relationships didn't have to be permanently damaged. But the next morning brought a text message that shattered any hope. It was from Chloe Martinez, our neighbor at Fort Henderson, now a close friend. Saw Vanessa's Instagram story. Are you okay? I opened Instagram, shaking. Vanessa's story was titled, Family Drama and Moving Forward. It was a carefully crafted narrative about the challenges of blending families with different parenting styles. She talked about holiday gatherings, the stress of documenting family moments, and the importance of forgiveness and grace. Her version, a minor disagreement, escalated by miscommunication. She painted herself as someone trying to help a fussy baby, misunderstood by overprotective parents. She never mentioned hitting Lucas, never acknowledged harm, and characterized the conflict as a learning experience. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. Her followers praised her maturity, her grace under pressure. I screenshot the entire story. Less than 12 hours after what felt like a breakthrough, Vanessa had publicly reframed the entire incident as a misunderstanding caused by my overreaction and David's inflexibility. She had taken our private conversation about her poor judgment and transformed it into a public narrative about other people's unreasonable expectations. She positioned herself as the victim of family drama, rather than the adult who had struck a baby. And she did it all while maintaining plausible deniability. Never technically lying, but also never telling the truth. When David came home from his morning run, he found me crying at the kitchen table. I showed him the phone without saying anything. He read it twice, his expression grim. "She played you," he said. The late-night call, the apparent acknowledgement, all of it was designed to get information she could use to craft this narrative. I felt foolish for having believed it. But more than that, I felt betrayed. By someone I'd loved since childhood. Someone who had used my willingness to give her another chance as an opportunity to further manipulate the situation. The phone started ringing again. "Patricia, probably." But I was done. Done listening to explanations about why my perceptions were wrong and my boundaries unreasonable. Instead, I did something I'd never done before in a family conflict. I started documenting everything. Exactly what happened at Christmas dinner, direct quotes. Screenshots of Vanessa's Instagram story. Notes about each phone conversation, the specific language my family used to minimize the incident and question my judgment. For the first time, I was treating my family like potential adversaries. As I organized the evidence, I began to understand that this pattern had been happening for much longer. This was how they always handled conflicts that threatened their preferred narrative. This was how they had always managed situations where Vanessa's behavior created problems. This was how they had trained me over decades to doubt my own perceptions and prioritize family harmony over my own well-being. But this time was different. The victim wasn't just me. It was my infant son. Someone who couldn't advocate for himself. This time, I had a partner who validated my concerns. And this time, I was going to fight back. The documentation process revealed patterns I hadn't consciously recognized. As I scrolled through old texts and social media, a clear picture emerged. Every time Vanessa created a problem, the same cycle played out: initial shock, followed by explanations and excuses, then pressure on everyone else to accommodate her version of events. I found a text thread from 2 years earlier, when Vanessa had shown up 4 hours late to our grandmother Eleanor's memorial service because she'd been filming a makeup brand collaboration. Instead of addressing her disrespect, the family had discussed how grief affects people differently. My hurt feelings had been reframed as selfishness. Another thread revealed Vanessa borrowing Patricia's car and returning it damaged. The insurance claim was thousands, but the family conversation focused on accidents happen. Patricia paid the deductible rather than asking Vanessa to take responsibility. The more I looked, the clearer it became that I had been trained to accept this. I'd learned to minimize my needs, question my perceptions, and prioritize everyone else's comfort. The Christmas dinner wasn't an anomaly. It was the most extreme example of a pattern that had shaped my life for decades. David found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by printed screenshots and handwritten notes, like a case file. He poured coffee and sat across from me. "This looks like intelligence gathering," he observed. "That's exactly what it is. I'm trying to understand how they do this. How they consistently make me feel like I'm the problem when they're the ones causing harm." I gestured to a timeline of family conflicts. "Look at this pattern. Every single time, the same thing happened." David examined it. Incident, denial, reframing, pressure to forgive, eventual acceptance. It's sophisticated. They've created a system that protects Vanessa from consequences while training everyone else to doubt their own judgment. But why me specifically? Why am I always the one being asked to be more understanding, more forgiving? Because you're the one who challenges. You're the one who notices when things don't add up. You're the one who asks uncomfortable questions. He pointed to incidents on my timeline. In every case, you were the person who initially called out the problematic behavior. They need to neutralize you because you're the threat to their system. The observation hit me hard. I had always been the disruptor. I thought I was being helpful, trying to improve family dynamics. But from their perspective, I threatened their carefully maintained equilibrium. My phone buzzed. Another text from Patricia. Honey, I saw Vanessa's Instagram story. I hope you can see that she's really trying to move forward. Maybe we could all get together this weekend to talk. I showed David. He shook his head. They're trying to reset the narrative again. Get everyone in the same room, apply social pressure, and convince you to accept their version for the sake of peace. But what if I'm wrong? What if I am being too rigid? What if there really is a way to work through this? David set down his cup. Let me ask you something. If one of my soldiers struck a baby during a family gathering, and then spent the next week convincing everyone that it hadn't really happened, while publicly reframing themselves as the victim, what would you think I should do? The question clarified everything. If this were anyone else's family, I'd be horrified. I'd advise them to protect their child, to document everything. I'd tell them to stay away from people who think hitting babies is negotiable. Right. So why is your family different? I didn't have a good answer. The only reason I was considering compromise was because these were people I'd loved my entire life. But none of that justified exposing Lucas to people who might hurt him again. That afternoon, an unexpected call from Chloe Martinez. She'd been following the situation. Natalie, I need to tell you something. I've been going through Vanessa's social media, and I found some posts from earlier this year you need to see. She sent me screenshots. Professional photo shoots with baby props, captioned about new beginnings. Another featured her holding a newborn, text about blessings of being an aunt. The problem? Both posts were published weeks before Lucas was born, using stock photos and borrowed babies. She'd been monetizing her relationship with my unborn child. There's more, Chloe said when I called her back. I found a whole series of posts about family traditions, holiday celebrations, and multi-generational gatherings that all feature photos from Christmas dinner last year. The one you and David missed because of his deployment. She's been creating this narrative about close family relationships that doesn't actually exist. I felt sick. Vanessa had built a brand around family content that was largely fiction. Her followers believed she was documenting authentic moments, but she was crafting staged content designed to generate engagement. The Christmas dinner incident started making more sense. Vanessa hadn't just been filming for personal documentation. She'd been creating content for a business that depended on maintaining a specific image. Lucas's crying had threatened not just her filming schedule, but her entire brand identity. When David came home, I showed him everything Chloe discovered. She's been using your family as content for months, he said. And not just documenting real experiences. She's been creating fictional narratives. Which means the Christmas dinner wasn't about family time at all. It was about creating content. Lucas and I were just props. And when Lucas interfered with the production, she prioritized her content over his well-being. The realization was devastating, but clarifying. This hadn't been a momentary lapse by someone overwhelmed by stress. This had been a calculated decision by someone who viewed our family as raw material for her business, and who was willing to harm a child to protect her commercial interest. I spent the evening documenting the extent to which she'd been monetizing our family relationships without our knowledge. Photos of our wedding, stories about David's deployment, speculation about future children, all used for sponsored posts. Most disturbing were posts about grandparents and family traditions, portraying Patricia and Robert as deeply involved, despite their minimal interest in Lucas. The gap between Vanessa's public narrative and our private reality was enormous. The next morning brought texts from various family members, all encouraging me to attend a family meeting Patricia had scheduled. The messages used similar language about healing and moving forward. But I was done being managed. Instead of responding, I called our insurance company to report the incident involving Lucas. I wasn't filing a claim, but I wanted it documented. I also called our pediatrician, Dr. Rebecca Walsh, and scheduled a consultation. The pediatric appointment was both validating and heartbreaking. Dr. Walsh examined Lucas, documented the fading mark, and asked detailed questions. "This is cause for serious concern, regardless of intent," she said. "Parents need to trust their protective instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Your job is to keep Lucas safe, not to manage other people's feelings about your safety measures." She also provided resources about family violence and documenting incidents for potential legal proceedings. I hadn't considered legal action, but having the information felt empowering after days of being told my concerns were overblown. That afternoon, I received a call from Captain Ryan Torres, one of David's closest colleagues. "Natalie, Maria, and I wanted you to know we're behind you 100%. What happened to Lucas is unacceptable, and how your family is handling it is concerning." I felt a wave of relief. After days of being told I was overreacting, it was powerful to hear from other parents who found it disturbing. "Thank you, Ryan. I've been starting to doubt my own judgment." "Don't. You're a good mother, and you're doing exactly what you should be." David is lucky to have a partner who will stand up for their child, even when it's difficult. Ryan also shared that David had been consulting military legal services. The military took family violence seriously. Resources were available for service members dealing with civilian family conflicts that might affect their security clearance. The conversation helped me realize David and I weren't alone. We had a community. Our family of choice was standing behind us, even if our family of origin was not. That evening, I made a decision that felt terrifying and liberating. I drafted a group text to Patricia, Robert, and Vanessa, clearly stating our boundaries. We would not be attending family gatherings until Vanessa acknowledged what had happened and demonstrated genuine accountability. The response was immediate and intense. My phone buzzed. Patricia called first, panicked, begging me not to destroy the family. Robert texted, asking me to reconsider a drastic response. Vanessa sent messages alternating between anger and hurt, accusing me of being vindictive. But the message that stopped me cold came from Linda, a distant cousin. "Saw the Instagram situation. This isn't the first time. Call me when you're ready to hear about the others." I stared at it. "What others?" David asked. I had no idea, but Linda wouldn't say something like that unless she had specific information. I called her immediately. "Natalie, I've been watching this unfold, and I think it's time you knew some things about your family that they've been keeping from you." "What kind of things?" Linda was quiet. "There have been other incidents over the years. Times when Vanessa hurt people, usually children. And the family covered it up or explained it away. I never said anything because it wasn't my place. But watching them do it to your baby. I can't stay quiet anymore." The conversation lasted 2 hours and changed everything I thought I knew. Linda told me about incidents dating back to Vanessa's teenage years, being rough with younger cousins, harsh with children she babysat, inappropriate with kids at family gatherings. In every case, the family intervened to minimize and protect Vanessa. Parents were told their children were dramatic or oversensitive. Witnesses were asked to keep quiet for the sake of family harmony. Vanessa was coached on what to say, but never held accountable. "I've watched your parents train that girl to believe she can hurt people without consequences, and I've watched them train everyone else to accept it." Linda also revealed something that explained a lot. Vanessa had been born with developmental delays requiring extensive early intervention. Patricia and Robert had spent years advocating for her, fighting for accommodations. The problem was, they'd never transitioned from protecting a child with special needs to holding an adult accountable for harmful behavior. They'd continued making excuses and providing accommodations long past the point where Vanessa was capable of controlling her actions. "She knows exactly what she's doing," Linda said. "She's learned that if she can make people feel sorry for her, she can get away with almost anything. And your parents enable it because they've spent so many years seeing her as vulnerable that they can't recognize when she's manipulative." By the time I hung up, I felt like I'd been given a completely different map of my family. Decades of confusing interactions now made sense. The pattern of protecting Vanessa wasn't recent. It was a system refined over years. More importantly, Linda's information made it clear that Lucas wasn't Vanessa's first victim, and he wouldn't be her last if the family continued enabling her. The next morning, I woke with absolute clarity. I wasn't just protecting Lucas from one incident. I was breaking a generational cycle of abuse and enabling that had been damaging children in my family for years. I called Linda back and asked her to provide written statements. She agreed immediately. I also reached out to other family members who might have information. Some were reluctant, but others were relieved to finally talk. By the end of the week, I had a comprehensive picture. David and I spent that weekend planning. We weren't interested in revenge, but we were committed to protecting Lucas and preventing future incidents. We decided to share our documentation with family members who had children, to give them information. We would maintain our boundaries. Linda's information made it clear this wasn't a problem that could be solved with better communication. This required fundamental changes in accountability, changes my family had shown no willingness to make. Most importantly, we decided to build our own family traditions and support systems that didn't depend on people who prioritized maintaining dysfunction over protecting children. Lucas deserved to grow up where his safety was never negotiable. The breaking point came when I received a certified letter from Vanessa's attorney, demanding I cease what they called a defamation campaign. The letter claimed I was spreading false information and damaging Vanessa's reputation. I stared at the letter in disbelief. I hadn't posted anything online, hadn't spoken to anyone outside immediate family except close friends. The only campaign I'd conducted was documenting actual events. David read it over my shoulder. "They're trying to intimidate you into silence," he said. "This is what people do when they know they're guilty but can't afford to have the truth come out." The letter demanded I sign a statement acknowledging no assault had occurred. In exchange, they wouldn't pursue legal action for defamation and intentional interference with business relationships. Business relationships, I repeated, feeling the full weight of this. She's not worried about family harmony. She's worried about her brand and her income stream. That afternoon, I called Janet Morrison, an attorney Linda had recommended. Janet agreed to see me immediately. "The letter is largely bluster," she told me after reviewing my documentation. "Truth is an absolute defense, and you have substantial evidence. But the fact that they're escalating suggests they're feeling genuine pressure." Janet explained that Vanessa's business model depended heavily on her public image. If sponsors and followers learned about her history with children, the financial impact could be devastating. The legal threats aren't really about protecting her reputation. They're about protecting her income. Prepare for them to escalate further. People with a lot to lose can become dangerous when cornered. Our strategy session revealed options I hadn't considered. We could file for a restraining order. Pursue legal action for emotional distress. Report the incident to Child Protective Services. Most importantly, Janet helped me understand I wasn't required to keep family secrets that put children at risk. The evidence I'd gathered wasn't gossip. It was information other parents had a right to know. That evening, I made copies of everything and prepared packages for family members with young children. Documentation of Christmas dinner, witness statements about previous events, and information about Vanessa's pattern. I wasn't asking anyone to choose sides. I was providing information. The response was swift and explosive. Within hours, my phone was ringing constantly. Patricia called first, in hysterics, begging me not to destroy the family. Robert texted, asking me to reconsider. Vanessa sent a series of messages, alternating between anger and hurt. But the most devastating call came from my cousin Sarah. She'd been present during several of the incidents Linda described. Now a mother, she'd received my information package. "Natalie, I need you to know that I believe everything you've documented. I was there for some of those incidents, and I've been carrying guilt about staying quiet for years. When I saw what happened to Lucas, I realized I couldn't protect my own kids if I couldn't even acknowledge what I'd witnessed." Sarah shared details about an incident from her teenage years, Vanessa pushing Sarah's younger brother down a flight of stairs after he'd knocked over something she was filming. He suffered a concussion. The family explained it as an accident. "I was 17 and scared of causing drama," Sarah said. "I've regretted it ever since. And when I had my own children, I made sure they were never alone with Vanessa, even though I couldn't explain why." Sarah also revealed something that changed my understanding. "Natalie, there's something else. Vanessa isn't just worried about her current business. She's been in talks with a major network about a reality show centered around her family content. The Christmas dinner footage was supposed to be part of her audition reel. The information hit me like a physical blow. Vanessa hadn't just been creating content for her existing followers. She'd been filming us for a potential television show without our knowledge. Lucas's first Christmas, treated as raw material. And when he'd interfered by acting like a normal baby, she'd prioritized the footage over his well-being. The network executives are supposed to review her submission this week, Sarah continued. That's probably why she's escalating the legal threats. If this information becomes public, it could destroy the biggest opportunity she's ever had. I shared this with David. His reaction was immediate and intense. Not anger, but the cold fury of someone who'd realized the full scope of a threat. She exploited our family for commercial purposes without our consent. And when our infant son interfered, she assaulted him, he said, his voice deadly calm. And now she's threatening legal action to prevent us from protecting other children. David's military training taught him to identify and neutralize threats. He approached this with methodical precision. We're not just dealing with a family conflict anymore. We're dealing with someone who's willing to harm children for financial gain and use legal intimidation to cover it up. That makes her a legitimate threat. The next morning, David contacted his command. His commanding officer, Colonel Martinez, made it clear that the military expected service members to report child abuse and protect their families. "We can't have personnel being blackmailed or intimidated," Colonel Martinez told us. "We'll provide whatever support you need." The military's backing was both practical and psychological. It meant David wouldn't face professional consequences. It gave us access to military legal resources. More importantly, it validated our decision to prioritize child protection over family harmony. That afternoon, Janet Morrison called with an update. After reviewing our documentation, she drafted a response that turned the tables. Instead of defending, we were putting Vanessa on notice about potential legal action for assault, emotional distress, and using our family for commercial purposes. The beauty of truth as a defense, Janet explained, is that it forces the other side to prove their claims are false. That's going to be very difficult for them. The letter made it clear we weren't seeking public attention. If Vanessa wanted to make it public, we were prepared. The response to our letter was immediate silence. No calls, no texts, no social media. The Sterling family apparatus had gone dark. But the silence was broken 3 days later. I received a call from Jessica Chen, a producer at the network considering Vanessa's reality show. She'd obtained information. "Miss Brooks, I'm calling because we've received some concerning information about your sister's family content. We need to understand what actually happened during the filming session she submitted. I stuck to facts, confirming the Christmas dinner had been filmed for commercial purposes, that an incident occurred, and that the family relationships portrayed didn't reflect reality. I didn't volunteer inflammatory details, but I answered honestly. "Thank you for your honesty," Jessica said. "This information is very helpful as we evaluate our programming decisions." Networks have to be extremely careful about liability issues, especially when children are involved. 2 hours later, my phone exploded. Word had gotten back to Vanessa. She was in full panic mode. Patricia called, crying. Robert sent texts about family loyalty. But the most revealing response came from Vanessa herself. She showed up at our house unannounced that evening. David answered the door. She stood on our porch, mascara streaks down her cheeks, hands shaking with rage. "You destroyed everything," she screamed. "Years of work, hundreds of thousands of followers, business relationships. All gone because you couldn't just let things go." "I didn't destroy anything, Vanessa. I protected my child and shared factual information with people who needed it. If that destroyed your business, maybe your business was built on lies." "It wasn't lies. It was content creation. It was storytelling. Everyone knows social media isn't completely literal. It's about creating aspirational content." David stepped between us. "You used our family as props for fictional content without our consent. And when our baby interfered with your production, you hit him. There's nothing aspirational about that. I barely touched him. And only because he was ruining months of work. Do you have any idea how hard it is to create authentic family content when people won't cooperate with the vision?" The admission was stunning. In her fury, Vanessa revealed she genuinely believed Lucas should have cooperated with her commercial filming and that striking him was justified. She wasn't apologetic. She was angry that he'd failed to perform. "Get off our property," David said quietly. "And don't come back. You can't just cut me out. I'm Lucas's aunt." "You have no rights to access a child you assaulted," David replied. "And if you come here again, I'll call the police." Vanessa's mask slipped completely. The influencer persona, the victim narrative, the claims of misunderstanding, all fell away to reveal someone who genuinely believed she was entitled to use our family, and that our refusal was a betrayal. She left, screaming threats, but her rage had strengthened our position. David had recorded the entire interaction, capturing her admission and her anger. Evidence that would be devastating if she pursued legal action. That night, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Christmas dinner, complete certainty. Vanessa's visit stripped away any remaining doubt. She wasn't sorry for hurting Lucas. She was angry that hurting Lucas had consequences. The war wasn't about one incident. It was about the right of children to be protected from adults who would harm them for personal gain, and the obligation of other adults to speak up, rather than protecting the abuser for the sake of peace. We'd chosen protection over peace, truth over comfort, and our child's safety over our family's dysfunction. The consequences were painful, but liberating. For the first time, I was free from the obligation to manage other people's emotions at the expense of my own well-being. The battle was far from over, but we'd established clear boundaries. We'd demonstrated that some things were worth fighting for. Lucas would grow up in a family that prioritized his safety, that valued truth, and that understood the difference between love and enabling. That was worth any price. 6 months later, Lucas took his first steps in our backyard. David and I cheered from the patio. He wobbled between the garden bed and the fence, his face lit up with pure joy. No cameras. No staged lighting. No audience beyond the 2 people who loved him most. It was authentic in a way Vanessa's manufactured content never could be. The legal threats had evaporated after Vanessa's recorded admission. Janet Morrison crafted a settlement that required privacy, but ensured we could share safety information with relatives. Vanessa agreed to seek counseling, though I doubted its effectiveness. The reality show opportunity disappeared after the network's background research. Jessica Chen later told me they'd received multiple corroborating accounts about Vanessa's history with children. Patricia and Robert initially maintained their position, but as more relatives came forward, their narrative became difficult to sustain. Linda organized a family meeting where several witnesses shared their accounts, creating a comprehensive picture even my parents couldn't dismiss. The meeting was devastating for Patricia, who genuinely seemed unaware of the extent of Vanessa's patterns. Robert absorbed the information silently, then retreated into his typical emotional withdrawal. Neither apologized directly, but their approach shifted from defending Vanessa to simply avoiding the topic. They stopped pressuring me to reconcile and began interacting with Lucas during brief, supervised visits. It wasn't the warm grandparent relationship I'd hoped for, but it was workable within our new boundaries. Vanessa herself had essentially disappeared from family dynamics. Her social media shifted away from family content. She'd apparently moved to Los Angeles, though her follower engagement dropped significantly. The most surprising development was the response from extended family members. Several cousins and aunts thanked me for speaking up. Sarah became a close ally. My cousin Marcus, who had been planning to ask Vanessa to babysit his toddler, was particularly grateful. "You probably prevented something terrible from happening," he told me. The military community at Fort Henderson rallied around us. Colonel Martinez ensured David faced no professional consequences. Several friends shared their own experiences with cutting contact with toxic family members. Captain Torres and Maria became particularly close friends, often joining us for gatherings that felt genuinely relaxed and supportive. "You know what I love about our gatherings?" Maria observed. "Nobody's performing. Nobody's managing anyone else's emotions. We're just enjoying each other's company." Dr. Walsh continued monitoring Lucas. At his one-year checkup, she commented on his secure attachment. "Children are resilient when they have consistent, protective caregivers," she'd said. "Lucas clearly knows he's safe with you." That meant more than any family reconciliation. We'd prioritized Lucas's well-being, and he was thriving. David was promoted to lieutenant colonel, partly based on his leadership during a complex family crisis. His commanding officers specifically noted his integrity. The promotion validated our decision-making. The military valued the same principles: protecting the vulnerable, clear boundaries, refusing to compromise core values. I'd started volunteering with a family advocacy program on base, helping other military spouses navigate difficult situations. Many had similar conflicts between loyalty to birth families and protection of their children. The work was challenging but meaningful. I learned to recognize the signs of gaslighting I'd missed in my own situation. Linda became an unexpected source of ongoing support. "Watching you stand up for your baby gave me permission to finally tell the truth about things I've been keeping quiet about for decades," she told me. Linda also provided updates about Patricia and Robert. They'd begun counseling, trying to understand how they'd enabled harmful behavior. "Your mother is starting to understand that protecting Vanessa from consequences didn't actually help anyone, including Vanessa. It's taken her this long to realize that love sometimes means allowing people to face the results of their choices." Lucas's first birthday party was a celebration of authentic family bonds. We invited our Fort Henderson friends, Linda, and a few supportive cousins. The gathering was small but genuine. David's toast brought tears to my eyes. To Lucas, who taught us the difference between family that demands your silence and family that earns your trust. May he always know the difference between love that protects and love that enables. The contrast with previous family celebrations was stark. No performing for cameras, no emotional management, no walking on eggshells. Lucas played freely. As I watched our son interact with people who genuinely cared, I felt deep gratitude. He was growing up surrounded by adults who modeled healthy boundaries, authentic communication, and unwavering commitment to child protection. The most surprising gift came from an unexpected source, Eleanor's sister, Margaret, 93, in an assisted living facility. She'd heard about our situation and requested a visit. Eleanor always said that family isn't about blood connections or social obligations, Margaret told us. She said family is about people who show up for each other when it matters, who tell the truth even when it's difficult, and who protect those who can't protect themselves. Margaret also revealed Eleanor had been concerned about Vanessa's behavior for years, but dismissed by my parents. Eleanor would be proud of what you did, Margaret said. You honored her values even when your own parents wouldn't. The validation from Eleanor's sister felt like a blessing. Eleanor had always been the family member who combined unconditional love with clear expectations. Learning she would have supported our choices provided deep comfort. Now, watching Lucas navigate our backyard with the confidence of a child who'd never doubted his safety, I understood. We'd given him something invaluable, the security of knowing that the adults in his life would always prioritize his well-being. Any regrets? David asked quietly. None, I replied. Look at him. He's fearless because he knows he's protected. He's curious because he's never been punished for being a normal child. He's confident because he's never been told that his needs don't matter. David nodded. He'll grow up knowing that love means protection, not accommodation. That family means safety, not obligation. That his worth isn't negotiable, even with people who share his DNA. The lessons we'd learned had become the foundation for our family culture. Lucas would understand that healthy relationships required mutual respect, that boundaries were expressions of self-care, and that sometimes love meant saying no to people who demanded harmful compliance. As the sun set, and Lucas finally tired himself out chasing butterflies, I felt complete peace. We'd traded the familiar dysfunction of my birth family for the uncertain work of building authentic relationships, and the trade had been more than worth it. Lucas would never remember the Christmas dinner that changed everything. But he would grow up with the benefits of our decision to prioritize his safety over family harmony. And he would know that his parents could be trusted to protect him, that his needs mattered, and that love never required accepting harm. The war that had begun with a slapped baby had ended with the victory that mattered most, a child who was safe, loved, and free to develop his own authentic self without performing for other people's emotional needs. In losing my birth family, I gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that I could build the kind of family that actually deserved the name.